Sarah Martinez pulled her worn baseball cap lower over her eyes as she approached the military recruitment office in downtown San Diego. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete plaza, and she could feel her heart racing with each step. At 28, she had spent the last 5 years working dead-end jobs, bouncing from one temporary position to another, never quite finding her place in the civilian world. The weight of her father's dog tags around her neck felt heavier than usual today. Commander Miguel Martinez had died in a training accident when Sarah was just 16, leaving behind only memories, a small pension, and an overwhelming sense of pride in his Navy SEAL service. Those dog tags were all she had left of the man who had taught her to swim before she could properly walk, who had shown her how to tie knots that could hold under pressure, and who had filled her childhood with stories of brotherhood and honor. Inside the recruitment office, Sergeant First Class Johnson looked up from his paperwork as Sarah entered. The office smelled of fresh coffee and had the sterile efficiency of military spaces everywhere. Motivational posters lined the walls, showing soldiers in various heroic poses, with slogans about honor, courage, and commitment. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Johnson asked, his voice professional but warm. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a carefully prepared folder. "I'm interested in learning about opportunities for someone with my background," she said, sliding the documents across the desk. Johnson opened the folder and his eyebrows raised slightly. The paperwork showed an impressive military record spanning several years of SEAL operations, including classified missions in Afghanistan and Iraq, combat decorations, commendations for bravery, specialized training certifications. It was the kind of record that would make any recruiter sit up and take notice. "This is quite impressive," Johnson said, studying the documents more carefully. "These operations, some of these are highly classified. What unit were you with?" Sarah had rehearsed this moment dozens of times. "SEAL Team 6, she replied, using the knowledge she had absorbed from years of research, military documentaries, and countless hours spent in online forums where veterans shared their experiences. "Most of it's still classified, but I can share what I'm allowed to." Johnson continued reviewing the paperwork, cross-referencing dates and operation names with his computer database. Something felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The records appeared legitimate, but there was something about the woman sitting across from him that didn't match the hardened operative described in these files. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify some of this information," Johnson said carefully. "These are serious claims, and we have protocols for handling former special operations personnel." Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, I understand completely. Security is paramount." Johnson picked up his phone and made a quiet call to his supervisor. Within minutes, Captain Williams emerged from the back office, his expression serious and focused. He was a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in military service. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Captain Williams," he said, extending his hand. "Sergeant Johnson here has shown me your documentation. I have to say, this is quite an impressive service record. However, I'm sure you'll understand that we need to verify these claims through official channels." "Absolutely," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'd expect nothing less." Captain Williams studied her for a long moment. Something about her demeanor, her posture, the way she held herself. It all seemed rehearsed, like someone playing a role rather than living it. "Tell me about Operation Neptune Spear," he said suddenly. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She had memorized countless details about SEAL operations. But this specific operation name wasn't immediately familiar. "I'm sorry, sir, but you know I can't discuss classified operations without proper clearance verification," she said, hoping to buy herself some time. "Of course," Williams nodded. "But surely you can tell me about the scar on your left shoulder. According to this medical report, you sustained a significant injury during a training exercise at Coronado." Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her left shoulder, where no such scar existed. She had been so focused on creating the paperwork that she had forgotten about the physical evidence that should accompany such a service record. "The scar has faded significantly," she said weakly. "Plastic surgery helped after I got out." Captain Williams exchanged a glance with Sergeant Johnson. Both men were beginning to realize they were dealing with an imposter, but they needed to be absolutely certain before taking action. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to need you to wait here while we complete our verification process," Williams said, his tone becoming more formal. "This shouldn't take too long." Sarah nodded, but her hands were beginning to tremble slightly. She watched as both men stepped into the back office, and she could hear the low murmur of urgent phone calls being made. Through the window, she could see people going about their normal lives, shopping, walking their dogs, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the recruitment office. 20 minutes later, 2 military police officers entered the building. They were polite but firm as they approached Sarah's chair. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them said. "There are some questions about your documentation that need to be resolved." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. "Is there a problem?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "We'll discuss everything at the base," the officer replied. "Please gather your things." As they escorted her out of the recruitment office, Sarah felt the weight of her deception crushing down on her. The dog tags around her neck seemed to burn against her skin, a reminder of the father whose memory she had just dishonored. The morning sun that had seemed so hopeful just hours earlier now felt harsh and unforgiving. The drive to the naval base passed in a blur of regret and fear. Sarah stared out the window at the San Diego landscape, wondering how her desperate attempt to find purpose and belonging had led her to this moment. She thought about her father, about the stories he had told her of honor and integrity, and realized how far she had strayed from everything he had taught her. At the base, she was taken to a small interview room that smelled of disinfectant and had the cold efficiency of a place designed for serious conversations. The walls were bare except for an American flag and a poster outlining the Uniform Code of Military Justice. A metal table sat in the center, surrounded by 4 chairs that looked like they had seen thousands of difficult conversations. Captain Williams entered the room an hour later, accompanied by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Agent Patricia Chen from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The atmosphere in the room was tense but professional. "Ms. Martinez," Agent Chen began, "we've completed our initial verification of your claims, and I'm afraid we have some serious concerns. The service record you presented contains several inconsistencies that suggest these documents may be fraudulent." Sarah looked down at her hands, unable to meet their eyes. "I can explain," she whispered. "We certainly hope you can," Agent Chen continued. "Impersonating military personnel is a federal offense, as is presenting fraudulent military documents. These are serious charges that could result in significant jail time." The room fell silent except for the humming of fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah realized that her desperate gamble had failed spectacularly, and now she was facing consequences she had never fully considered. The weight of her father's legacy, which she had hoped to honor through her deception, now felt like a burden of shame she would carry forever. "Before we proceed," Captain Williams said, "I want you to understand the gravity of this situation. We take military impersonation very seriously, not just because it's illegal, but because it dishonors every man and woman who has actually served their country with honor and sacrifice." Sarah finally looked up, tears forming in her eyes. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I've made a terrible mistake. I wanted to be something more than I am. I wanted to honor my father's memory." "Your father?" Agent Chen asked, leaning forward with interest. "Commander Miguel Martinez," Sarah replied. "He was a Navy SEAL. He died in a training accident 12 years ago. I've been lost ever since, trying to figure out how to live up to his example." Agent Chen made a note in her file. "We'll need to verify that information as well," she said. "But for now, let's focus on the documents you presented today. Can you tell us where you obtained them?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the truth was her only option now. The elaborate fiction she had constructed was crumbling around her, and she had to face the consequences of her actions. Outside the small window of the interview room, she could see naval personnel going about their duties, living the life of service she had only pretended to know. The conversation that followed would determine not just her immediate future, but whether she would face federal charges that could destroy any chance she had of building a legitimate life. As she prepared to confess her deception, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if her father would ever be able to forgive her for what she had done in his name. The confession came slowly, like water through a cracked dam. Sarah sat in the sterile interview room, her voice barely above a whisper as she detailed the months of preparation that had led to this moment. Agent Chen took careful notes, while Captain Williams listened with a mixture of disappointment and curiosity. "I spent 8 months researching," Sarah admitted, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Military forums, documentaries, books written by former SEALs. I learned the terminology, the structure, the types of operations. I found templates for military documents online and modified them." Agent Chen looked up from her notepad. "These are sophisticated forgeries, Ms. Martinez. This level of detail suggests significant planning and research. What was your ultimate goal?" Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I thought if I could prove I had military experience, I could get into security work, maybe private contracting, something that would make my father proud, something that would give my life meaning." "Your father, Commander Miguel Martinez," Captain Williams said, consulting a file that had been brought in during the interview. "We've located his service record. He was indeed a Navy SEAL, died in a helicopter training accident in 2012, decorated veteran with an exemplary record." The mention of her father's verified service made Sarah's emotions surge again. "He was everything I'm not," she said. "Strong, brave, honorable. I've been drifting since he died, working retail jobs, living paycheck to paycheck. I thought maybe if I could be like him, even if it was fake, I could find some direction." Agent Chen closed her notepad and leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Martinez, what you've done is serious. Fraudulent enlistment, impersonating military personnel, presenting false documents. These charges could result in several years in federal prison." Sarah nodded, accepting her fate. "I understand. I'm ready to face the consequences." But Captain Williams was studying something in the file, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Agent Chen, there's something here that doesn't add up. Look at this medical report from Commander Martinez's service record." Agent Chen took the file and examined the documents Williams was pointing to. Her expression shifted from routine professionalism to surprise. "This is interesting. Ms. Martinez, do you have any identifying marks or scars? Birthmarks? Anything distinctive?" Sarah looked confused by the question. "I have a birthmark on my back, shaped kind of like a crescent moon. My dad used to joke that it looked like a SEAL trident if you squinted." The two investigators exchanged meaningful glances. Captain Williams stood up abruptly. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to wait here. We'll be back shortly." They left Sarah alone in the room, her mind racing with questions. Through the small window she could see military personnel walking past, and she wondered what would happen to her next. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the clock on the wall ticked away the minutes with mechanical precision. 30 minutes passed before the door opened again. This time, Agent Chen entered alone. carrying a thick file and wearing an expression that Sarah couldn't read. "Ms. Martinez, we've made some calls and reviewed additional documentation. I need to ask you some very specific questions about your family history." Sarah nodded, still confused but willing to cooperate. "What do you know about your father's deployment history, specifically his time overseas during the early 2000s? "He was deployed several times to Afghanistan and Iraq," Sarah replied. "But he never talked much about the details. He said some things were better left in the past." Agent Chen opened the file and pulled out a photograph. "Do you recognize this woman?" The photograph showed a young Afghan woman holding a small child. The woman had dark hair and eyes, and there was something familiar about her features that Sarah couldn't quite place. "I don't think so," Sarah said, studying the image. "Should I?" "Her name was Fatima al-Rashid. She was an interpreter who worked with American forces, including your father's unit during a classified operation in 2003. According to the records, she helped save several American lives during an ambush." Sarah shook her head. "My father never mentioned her." Agent Chen pulled out another document. "Ms. Martinez, this is going to be difficult to process, but we believe Fatima al-Rashid may have been your biological mother." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My mother died when I was born. My father raised me alone." "The woman who died when you were born was Maria Santos, your father's wife," Agent Chen explained gently. "But according to these classified documents, your biological mother was Fatima al-Rashid. Your father brought you back from Afghanistan when you were just 6 months old." Sarah stared at the photograph, her entire understanding of her identity crumbling. "You're saying I'm adopted? That my father never told me?" "It appears that way. And there's more." Agent Chen pulled out another document. Fatima al-Rashid had a distinctive birthmark that she passed on to her daughter. A crescent-shaped mark on her back that, according to this medical report, resembled the seal trident. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her back, where her own birthmark had always been a source of family jokes. "This can't be real." "I'm afraid it is. And here's the crucial part. According to these records, Fatima al-Rashid was given an honorary seal trident marking as recognition for her service and sacrifice. It was tattooed on her shoulder by the unit medic as a symbol of her acceptance into the Brotherhood. The room spun around Sarah as the implications began to sink in. "Are you saying my birthmark is actually—" "We believe it's a genetic manifestation of the honorary marking your biological mother received. It's extremely rare, but there are documented cases of such markings appearing in children whose parents received them." Agent Chen pulled out one final document, a letter written in her father's handwriting. "We found this in Commander Martinez's personal effects, sealed with instructions that it only be opened if questions ever arose about your heritage." Sarah took the letter with trembling hands and began to read. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then somehow the truth about your birth has come to light. Your mother Fatima was the bravest person I ever knew. She saved my life and the lives of my teammates, sacrificing her own safety to guide us through enemy territory. When she died protecting our position, I promised her I would raise you as my own daughter, and I have never regretted that decision for a single day. The mark on your back is not just a birthmark. It is a symbol of your mother's courage and her honorary place among the SEALs. She earned that mark through blood and sacrifice, and you carry it as her legacy. You are not just my daughter, Sarah. You are the daughter of a hero who gave everything for her adopted country. I never told you because I wanted you to find your own path, not feel burdened by a legacy you didn't choose. But if the truth has emerged, know that you have every right to that mark and to the pride that comes with it." Sarah finished reading the letter through tears, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The photograph of her biological mother stared back at her from the table, and for the first time, she could see the resemblance, not just in features, but in the determined expression, the strength in her eyes. "So the mark," Sarah whispered. "It's real?" Agent Chen nodded slowly. "According to these classified documents, yes. Your biological mother earned that marking through extraordinary service to American forces. The genetic inheritance of such markings is extremely rare, but it has been documented in a few cases throughout history." Captain Williams entered the room at that moment, carrying another file. "Ms. Martinez, we've just received confirmation from the Pentagon. General Patricia Stevens, who was a colonel at the time and worked with your father's unit, is being briefed on this situation. She specifically remembers both your father and your biological mother." The gravity of the situation was beginning to dawn on Sarah. Not only had she been living a lie about her military service, but she had been unknowingly carrying the legacy of a genuine war hero, her biological mother. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and uncertain. Agent Chen looked at Captain Williams before answering. "That depends on several factors. Your attempt to fraudulently enlist is still a serious crime, but the circumstances surrounding your biological heritage and the authentic nature of your marking complicate things significantly." "General Stevens has requested to speak with you personally," Captain Williams added. "She's flying in from Washington tonight. Until then, you'll remain in custody, but your situation is being reviewed at the highest levels." As Sarah was led back to a holding cell to wait for the general's arrival, her mind raced with questions about her identity, her heritage, and the woman whose courage she had unknowingly inherited. The birthmark on her back, which she had always seen as an amusing family quirk, now felt like a sacred trust, a reminder of a mother she had never known, but whose bravery flowed through her veins. The small holding cell was sparse but clean, with a narrow cot and a small window that looked out onto the base's parade ground. As evening approached and the base settled into its nighttime routine, Sarah lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, trying to process the complete upheaval of everything she thought she knew about herself. Tomorrow would bring a conversation with a general who had known both her father and her biological mother, who could fill in the gaps in a story that had been hidden from her for 28 years. The fraudulent documents that had brought her here now seemed trivial compared to the authentic legacy she had been carrying all along, written not in paperwork, but in her very DNA. General Patricia Stevens arrived at the base at 0800 hours sharp, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone she passed. Now, in her late 50s, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform displayed an impressive array of ribbons and commendations that spoke to a distinguished career. Sarah had barely slept, her mind churning with questions about the mother she had never known and the father who had kept such a profound secret. When the guards came to escort her to the meeting, her hands were trembling with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The conference room where they met was larger than the interview room, with a polished oak table and chairs that suggested this was where important decisions were made. General Stevens was already seated when Sarah entered, studying a thick file that contained decades of classified documents. "Ms. Martinez," the general said, standing to shake Sarah's hand. "Please, sit down. I imagine you have many questions." Sarah settled into the chair across from the general, struck by the woman's direct but kind demeanor. "General, I don't even know where to begin." General Stevens smiled slightly. "Let me start by telling you about your mother. Fatima al-Rashid was one of the most remarkable people I've ever had the privilege to know." She opened the file and pulled out a series of photographs, spreading them across the table. The images showed a young Afghan woman in various settings, translating for American soldiers, treating wounded civilians, leading groups of refugees to safety. Fatima wasn't just an interpreter, General Stevens continued. She was a physician who had trained at Kabul University before the Taliban restricted women's education. She spoke 4 languages fluently and had an encyclopedic knowledge of the region's tribal politics. Sarah studied the photographs, seeing her own features reflected in her biological mother's face. How did she end up working with American forces? She approached us, the general replied. Her village had been destroyed by Taliban forces, and she had lost most of her family. But instead of fleeing, she offered her services to help protect other villages in the region. She said she couldn't save her own family, but maybe she could save others. General Stevens pulled out a map marked with various military positions and operational routes. This was Operation Sandstorm, a classified mission to establish safe corridors for refugee evacuation. Your father's SEAL team was tasked with providing security for the operation, and Fatima was our primary liaison with local communities. What happened? Sarah asked, though she sensed the answer would be painful. The general's expression grew somber. 3 weeks into the operation, we received intelligence about a planned Taliban ambush at one of our primary evacuation sites. Your father's team was escorting a group of 37 civilians, mostly women and children, when they walked into the trap. She pointed to a spot on the map marked with a red X. The ambush was perfectly positioned. The SEALs were outnumbered 3-1, trapped in a narrow canyon with no escape route. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a massacre. Sarah leaned forward, captivated by the story she was finally hearing about her mother. Fatima did something extraordinary, General Stevens continued. She knew the canyon system better than anyone, including secret passages that the Taliban didn't know about. But the only way to guide the team to safety was to expose herself to enemy fire. The general pulled out a detailed tactical report, its pages marked with official stamps and signatures. According to the after-action report, Fatima deliberately drew enemy fire by running across open ground, making herself a target while directing the SEALs and civilians to the hidden passages. She saved 39 lives that day. But she died, Sarah said quietly. She was wounded in the initial exchange, General Stevens confirmed. But she continued to guide the evacuation even while bleeding. Your father carried her for the last 2 kilometers to the extraction point. She died in his arms, just as the rescue helicopters arrived. The room fell silent as Sarah absorbed the magnitude of her mother's sacrifice. The photographs on the table seemed to take on new meaning. They weren't just images of a stranger, but documentations of a hero whose courage had shaped the course of an entire military operation. Before she died, General Stevens continued, Fatima made your father promise 2 things. First, that he would take care of you. You were just 6 months old at the time, being cared for by an elderly woman in the village. Second, that he would ensure you grew up knowing you were loved, even if you never knew the full truth about her sacrifice. Sarah wiped away tears that had started flowing freely. So my father adopted me? More than that. Your father fought through months of military bureaucracy and international adoption procedures to bring you home. He could have handed you over to refugee services or international adoption agencies, but he was determined to honor his promise to your mother. General Stevens pulled out another document, an official military commendation with elaborate calligraphy and multiple official seals. This is why your birthmark is so significant, Sarah. 3 days before the operation, your father's unit participated in a traditional ceremony with local tribal leaders. Fatima had convinced several villages to cooperate with the evacuation, and the elders wanted to honor her service. The ceremony? Sarah asked. They marked her with a traditional symbol of protection and courage, using a technique that had been passed down for generations. The tribal elder said it would ensure that her bravery would live on in her children. At the time, none of us understood what he meant. General Stevens turned to a medical report in the file. Military physicians have documented several cases of genetic inheritance of acquired markings, particularly those received in moments of extreme emotional or spiritual significance. Your birthmark isn't just a coincidence, Sarah. It's a literal inheritance of your mother's courage. Sarah touched her shoulder, where she had always carried the crescent-shaped mark. So when I was pretending to be a SEAL, you were unknowingly claiming a heritage that was authentically yours, the general finished. Your mother earned her place among warriors through blood and sacrifice. The mark you carry is proof of that legacy. The general closed the file and looked directly at Sarah. Which brings us to your current situation. What you did, creating fraudulent military documents and attempting to enlist under false pretenses, was serious and wrong. However, the circumstances surrounding your heritage create a unique situation. Sarah nodded, understanding that her legal problems weren't simply going away despite the revelations about her mother. I've spoken with the Pentagon, the NCIS, and the base commander, General Stevens continued. Given your authentic hereditary connection to military service and the extraordinary circumstances of your mother's sacrifice, we're prepared to offer you an alternative to criminal prosecution. What kind of alternative? Sarah asked. General Stevens pulled out one final document, an enlistment contract with the official seals of the Department of Defense. Legitimate military service. You'll start at the bottom, go through basic training like everyone else, earn your place through merit and dedication rather than deception. Your mother's legacy gives you the right to try, but it doesn't guarantee success. Sarah stared at the contract, hardly believing what she was hearing. You're offering me the chance to actually serve? Under strict conditions, the general clarified. You'll be monitored closely during training. Any hint of deception or failure to meet standards will result in immediate discharge and prosecution for your original crimes. This isn't charity, Sarah. This is an opportunity to honor your mother's memory through genuine service. The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah like a physical force. Everything she had tried to fake was now being offered to her legitimately, but with the understanding that she would have to earn it through the same dedication and sacrifice that her mother had shown. There's something else, General Stevens said, pulling out a small wooden box. This belonged to your mother. Your father left it in his personal effects with instructions that it be given to you if the truth about your heritage ever emerged. Sarah opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, identical to her birthmark. Attached was a note in her father's handwriting. Your mother wore this every day. She said it would protect her and ensure her courage lived on in you. Wear it with honor. As Sarah fastened the necklace around her neck, she felt a connection to both her fathers, the one who had raised her with love and devotion, and the mother who had given her life so that others might live. The fraudulent documents that had brought her to this moment now seemed like a necessary path to discovering her true identity. I accept, Sarah said, her voice strong and clear for the first time in days. I want to earn the right to wear the uniform. General Stevens smiled and extended her hand. Welcome to the United States Navy. Recruit Martinez. Your real journey starts now. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the graduation platform at Naval Station Great Lakes, her dress uniform crisp and her posture perfect. The birthmark on her back had become not a source of shame or deception, but a daily reminder of the courage she had inherited and the legacy she was determined to honor. In the audience, Captain Williams and Agent Chen watched with satisfaction as the young woman who had once tried to fake her way into military service now legitimately earned her place among the ranks. General Stevens, who had made a special trip to attend the ceremony, nodded approvingly as Sarah received her graduation certificate. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah joined her fellow graduates in celebration, She touched the crescent moon necklace at her throat and thought of the woman whose sacrifice had made this moment possible. She had begun this journey trying to pretend to be someone she wasn't, only to discover that she was exactly who she was meant to be. The fraudulent documents that had started everything were now destroyed, replaced by authentic service records that she had earned through her own sweat, determination, and unwavering commitment to honor her mother's memory. The mark on her back was no longer a family joke, but a sacred symbol of the courage that flowed through her veins and the responsibility she carried to live up to the extraordinary legacy of love and sacrifice that both her parents had given her.